Okay.
Got it.
We're here
We're here. How a
and we're
little bit of
live.
technical difficulties getting us set up today, but that's all right.
I feel like, well, I think Mercury's in retrograde, as they say, so communication is a little bit spotty, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say it that.
We'll chalk it up to that.
When in doubt, blame the stars. They're here to
Oh, there we go.
take take the brunt of it for us.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So it's been a little while since we've talked.
yep.
We
Yeah.
also talked about making our talks shorter so we
Yes.
can do a couple different topics if you want to.
Yeah.
I'll watch the time and
Okay.
I mean you can too, but we'll try to keep it like to 20 to 30 minutes and then we can even create a new one if we want to.
Okay. That sounds good.
Um,
So
so yeah, go
is,
ahead.
is there something that's present for you, a topic that's present for you that you want to dive into for 20 to 30 minutes?
I mean, I could talk about a lot of things for a long time. As we were talking pre-recording, there's been a lot of shifting in my life over the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And some of it has been really painful and some of it has been really illuminating.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of existential, like, what am I doing kind of things going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I'm not really sure where to start with all of that. There's been a lot of health stuff going on with me too, but I also think that part of when one thing changes, kind of the ripple effect is like all kinds of things change.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's very cryptic in what I just said, but you can pick that up and run with it if you want.
Yeah. So, what jumped out at me most was this existential, what am I doing kind of question energy that was present for you. Do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a question for a long time now, and we've
Yeah.
talked about it a little bit.
Yes, we have.
Um, and I think, we had a big shift happen in our house where my partner showed up with like an experience,
Mhm.
and that has allowed for so much unfolding and safety,
Yeah.
and also like it almost had to get really scary and terrifying for then the safety to come in.
Yeah.
Um, and um, that safety has then allowed for that existential crisis of like, what am I doing and why am I doing it to
Yeah.
have like a new flavor to it?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that I've been a teacher. I've been teaching massage for a long time, but that's been one of the big questions of like, you know, my whole life has changed and where does that fit into it?
Yeah.
Um, I used to be a big hustler, I was always out like marketing and networking and all this, and life has really asked me to slow way down.
Hmm.
And so it's like what parts can be cut out and what parts can't,
Yeah.
and it really comes into like, some days I just want to show up and do my work. I want to show up and like the students to be there. I want to show up and my clients to be there.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as a business owner, that's just not really how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I hear you talking about like the the shift that your partner has had and how that's kind of affecting you and how in particular it's affecting you and like asking what do I do now, and I've been working and going really hard, and maybe you don't want to do that so much anymore, like how can I find a new way and maybe find it in a new activity or something like that, and but I heard you say the word safety, that somehow the safety has allowed you to begin to go through this process. And
Mhm.
I want to dive into that. But also want to share like an image that came to my mind as you were talking there, and it was like the image of a dam, not like a dam breaking, but just the dam. And here's like all the water up here, and then underneath the dam is like huge torrential. They're letting out. They always let out some water of the dam because the lake behind the dam is always collecting water. So it's just this like, then it starts to flatten out. You know, so it's kind of that came up because it like it's like your partner's like finally letting stuff out maybe, or something's changed, right? And there's this stuff, and then it's like, okay, and now we're settling. And it's like, okay, we're not over here anymore. Now we're over here, and it's different.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah. So safety. Tell me, you were saying like that was like scary or difficult, but now there's
Hmm.
safety. So
Hmm.
talk more about that.
I mean, I think that I'm in the process right now, like, which is a really cool place to be. Like
Mhm.
I'm not on the other side yet looking back, but in some ways I've had glimpses of that where
Yeah.
I can see behind me a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, so like a little backstory to understand, right? Some context. When two people decide to get together for whatever, like companionship, relationship, whatever,
Yeah.
there's certain things that are expected because of what we were raised with, our culture, our ideals. And I think that at some point, like the relationship is separate from the two individuals, right? And so the relationship itself tends to go through its own evolution.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we still have two whole people on the outsides, like hopefully tending to the relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when um one person, so here's what was kind of happening. I was being awakened to a lot of things. I was being called in a lot. Like when I was pregnant with my fourth child, that's really whenever this all happened. This all started. I kept
So
having
2 years ago?
yeah, she's almost 2.5 now. So it
Oh,
was probably about 3 years ago
3 years.
ish,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I started getting these visions. I started getting like really deep callings to understand something more spiritual, something more deeper. And it was really scary because I've been very science based and almost like from a trauma perspective,
Yeah.
like spirituality was traumatic. Um, so I was like, wait a second, why am I being pulled back into this whenever I've been kind of like shutting that door for a while?
Yeah.
So, but there was really no option. There was no choice in like whether or not I was going to be able to like see and do something about these visions and this calling.
Right.
So that's what, I started really diving into archetypes and the more deeper dive questions of life and like motherhood specifically, which is what brought me to like teaching and facilitating Mother Circle. And then that opened up all kinds of doors. And then, in what even made me reach out to you, right, is the conversation about the feminine and the masculine
Yeah.
and how that it really feels like tapped into this like bigger thing that's happening universally or collectively, that like the feminine is rising. And a lot of people are saying that and a lot of people are feeling that.
Yeah.
And I'm no different, like I was feeling that too.
Hmm.
And so I kept trying to bring my partner along with me, and I'd be like, "Ooh, read this book. Oh, listen to this. Oh, what do you think about this?"
Yeah.
And he had very much said a lot of not condescending, but like dismissive things that were like, "Oh, that's your thing.
Yeah.
That's, kind of like over there. I'll get to it one day." And I kept kind of like trying to bring him in.
Yeah.
And then as sometimes um epiphanies or awakenings can bubble up slowly and sometimes they smack you in the face. And for him it was like a smack in the face, where we even got to the place that I was like ready to leave. Actually I think our last conversation
Uh-huh.
was the day after his big smack in the face awakening, and
Wow.
he hadn't told me about it yet.
Yeah.
But and I just remember, I look back, or I remember back into our conversation, and I can see how my vibe about it was very much like, this is over. I've got to figure out how to get back on my feet. I need to step into my own like power as a woman who's raising kids all by myself, blah blah
Yeah.
blah.
Hmm.
And so now it's like he has truly stepped into his masculine, like, and really has dived into what does that mean, and like how he can stop being a fucking victim of his life
Yeah.
and start being like a co-creator in his life.
Yeah.
And him stepping into that has allowed me, now this is where that safety piece comes in, right? Where that has then allowed me to be truly in my feminine. And I'm still trying to get used to that. I'm still trying to navigate, like, what does that look like and what does that mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
feeling like day to day, like when he says something and noticing my reactions versus reacting in the
Mm.
way. And I think, I mean, to get really deep about it, I think that this is, like I was saying, like collectively, this is happening for a lot of people. It's not just my house and my family, which, whoa, that's trippy when you think about that. Like we are really all connected, right?
Yeah.
And like, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
whoa. Um,
Yeah.
but also it makes me look back on how like the entire life of mine, the like 39 years I've been here, I have been asked to live outside of my nature, being way more masculine than I was
Yeah.
designed to be.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could even think about this from like generations, right? Like my parents were like that, my grandparents were like that too. So it's
Yeah.
not just me.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a writing of the energies that are happening right now.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful stuff. Yeah, and I can sense like the difficulty in navigating that space of like, oh, his energy, his level, his capacity has changed. He's beginning to show up differently, and that's opening a door for you into a new space that maybe deep down you know about that space, but to actually live and engage and come from that space on a much, much more regular basis is like, oh, what do I do in here?
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
yeah, I hear that. And I want to speak to and acknowledge, like, I believe you're 100% right. Like, it's not just you and your family. Um,
mhm,
my brother is going through something similar, without, he had kind of an awakening, right at the beginning of COVID. And there was a lot of change that happened there, internally for him and in his relationship. And it's kind of like they're at another inflection point. Um,
mhm.
and I don't have permission to speak about the details there,
Right.
but just to say that you're not the only one. And I think, yeah, absolutely, we could, take a poll of our friends and people we know and the internet, and people would say, yeah, there's a lot of that going on, definitely, because it's talking about feminine power rising. I think it's been rising for quite a while, and it's at a point where there is a great deal of strength in women, a lot of strength in women. I mean, look at right now, it's 2024, it's an election year, and Joe Biden just stepped down and Kamala Harris stepped up. So we've got a female, not just a female, but a female of color, um, you know, uh, potentially taking the highest office in the land, right? So that's just, I see it as like a symbolic representation of what's maybe going on in a
Mhm,
lot of individual lives and on the planet, you know, and kind of like again, with your internal process or with your family dynamic process going on, I think the same thing can be mirrored on the macro scale, like
Mhm.
in that opening, in this, rising and changing, there's all this, whirlpool, tumultuous energy at the other side of the dam, right? And then after that, things settle down, there's peace. And I don't think anyone could debate that the earth is in a lot of turmoil right now in a lot of different ways and in almost every place,
Mhm.
and just how that can't be avoided here in your family situation. I think it cannot be avoided on the global scale either. And the question then is, how do we navigate that space? And I think maybe a better question is, how do we prepare ourselves to navigate that space, right? Because you can be told what to do or learn what to do, but if you're not ready and you don't have the skill set or the
Mhm.
foundation to do those things, you're not going to be able to,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, how do we prepare?
Well, I love that. And something, just some wisdom that I've gained through this experience. The first thing is surrendering. Like there's a whole lot of like,
Yeah,
no, I don't, I'm scared of this and I'm gonna avoid it.
yeah,
Um, and that has just made it even more challenging and more difficult.
yeah,
So um in some ways it's like, to continue your dam metaphor, it's kind of like you just have to ride the water that goes down, you
right.
know.
Yeah,
Um
yeah,
and something that, like, Steven, my partner, and I have been talking about is um how well, like, part of it is the surrender, but the other part is, like, are you listening? Are you hearing what is being guided through you?
yeah,
And then are you responding to what you're hearing? Um and that's been an interesting little experiment as well, because it's one thing to be like, well, okay, so another piece of this is like, part of what I experienced was I traveled to Kansas City for a big massage therapy educator conference. And on one of the, I ended up coming home early because one of the nights I had like a major, major panic attack, and like almost took take me to the hospital.
yeah,
Um, and Stephen actually talked me through it. And in previous times, he's not always been the best person to talk to during a crisis, because he kind
yeah.
of would fan those flames. So so it was just like a really great experience in that safety of like, oh, okay, things are different. He is showing up differently. It was like more evidence that like there was a change amongst us.
Yeah, yeah,
And then there has been a couple of other panic attacks since then. And I mean, I could put all kinds of ideas about why this happened, into that. But I almost feel like what I gathered from that was, are you listening? And
hmm
are you ready to completely surrender to this, what looks like a panic attack? Are you going to try to stop it? Are you going to try to pretend like it's not happening? Or, I could have very well been like, well, that was a weird fluke thing that happened. I'll never deal with that again.
right.
But instead, I like called my doctor.
Hmm.
I did a lot of things, actually. It wasn't just that, but like I've done a lot of things now to be really careful as when they come. And I haven't had a panic attack now in like 2 weeks, which is really nice. But I think that part of that is listening and not always knowing what the heck you're listening to.
Yeah,
Um, because some of these panic attacks have brought really strong messages, like you need to be using, like, one of the messages that I received was, you need to be using the land of which you are on in a
mhm,
more mindful way. So
mm,
like, what are you like, I live in the city, so what can you do with the land? But I do live on a plot of land.
right.
And so it was like, how am I tending to the dirt that's underneath my home, dirt and underneath my feet? That was like a very clear message one day
Yeah.
in one of these panic attacks.
Uh-huh.
other things have been a lot more subtle and a lot more like, well, I feel like I should cancel this meeting or whatever. Or I feel like I should be going to eat this food or something, and just really leaning, surrendering into that and just being like, okay, this is how I write the health things that I've been having. I have some autoimmune stuff going on. So, and I mean, I've always wanted to live like that, but now I almost feel like it's not even an option. Like it just has to be this way.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think a lot of things that I'm asking and questioning myself right now is like, how do I do all the things that I love, and like, well, what is it that I love to do?
Mhm.
And how do I do this in a way that's honoring that desire for less hustle, desire for like listening and surrendering, and still, participate in the culture that we do live in, where like I got to pay taxes and feed my children and stuff like
Right,
that.
right,
And
yeah,
it's really hard, it's a delicate balance to try to attain.
yeah, definitely, yeah. Mm. Yeah, I'm hearing you talk about these messages, maybe are learning to listen deeper and like take action in that space. And that maybe you're feeling supported for the first time through these by your partner, which
Hmm.
I'm sure has got to feel just really good in so many ways.
Hmm.
And maybe new and different, and like, yeah. Yeah. What was that like to have him kind of help you come down from that time in Kansas City?
Um, there was a lot of, I have a lot of skills in crisis and in anxiety and panic. That's because I have a lifetime of this, and I have a son who's really anxious too. So I've had to learn a lot about how to mitigate crisis situations. That's part of my trauma informed training as well. And I was like utilizing all of the tools that I had uh,
Mm,
available to me, but really him being on the other line, and saying what was coming through him. And I think that's part of it too, is like he's listening to the messages, and we're also talking about the messages, like he
yeah.
he was saying, I like that night, he was like, I was listening to you in a
Hmm.
different way than I've ever listened to you before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, especially for anyone like watching this, I part of what I worry about or I'm concerned about is like when I talk about these messages, it's not like some weird woo woo thing. It's really like my intuition and listening to like what's my body and my heart and my mind are telling me.
Yeah.
But then it's almost like the awakening he experienced allowed him to listen to himself.
Yeah.
Whereas before,
Yeah.
we literally say before the awakening or after, like
Uh,
some people say before COVID or after COVID, like the
yeah.
before times.
Yeah.
Now we have like a before times like from two
Yeah.
months ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think the before times he had so many things to like filter through, his
Yeah.
confidence, his wounding, his whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas like now it's more like he's hearing himself, like
Yeah.
he's in the driver's seat of his own life,
Yeah.
and not all the inner child stuff and all the
Yeah.
trauma that he's experienced,
Yeah.
and he has like more anchors and access points, so he can come from a more supportive place because he's not trying to like battle all those parts of himself.
Yeah. 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 That's amazing. And I 100% agree. Like I think there's a huge amount of truth there. Like, um, truth that like we can only listen as deeply and as presently as we are healed, maybe if that if that's a phrase. Maybe I could phrase it differently. Like if you haven't done any work with yourself, you're going to have a lot of different voices going on in your
Hmm.
head. You're going to have your 5-year-old self, your 10-year-old self talking about their needs, and they're going to be having responses and being triggered by events of your life. And those could be very loud voices. right?
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
could be your teenage self, it could be your 20-year-old self. There's all these different parts and different voices, from our past, from all the things that we've been through, that are there, that there are these mechanisms, these things that are trying to keep us safe, right?
Yes.
They're trying to make us feel okay. Like we as a child decided because of something our mom did, or something our dad did, or something maybe some kids at school did, or our teacher
Yep.
did, that we learned like, oh fuck, don't do that. Let's do this instead because that was bad. We just got shamed. Maybe we got hit, you know,
Hmm.
don't ever do that again.
Right.
So we're gonna do this, right? And then you've just done that for 30 fucking years, right?
Yep.
And your partner's trying to talk to you about something and you're like, you can't do that. You're gonna get shamed, you're gonna get hit. Do
Yep.
not. Don't be present right now. That's not okay. You need to do this right now to be safe,
Right.
right? So if you haven't done any work to bring love and compassion and connection and reintegrate those parts of yourself, it's going to be really hard to hear not only your partner, but maybe the more authentic, the more calm, loving, kind of like the maybe ideal self, or like the truest self or deepest self, like these other voices are going to cover that up. So you won't
Hmm.
be able to hear very well outside, and you're not going to be able to hear very well inside.
Hmm.
And like it's really just a blessing for your partner to have this spontaneous kind of awakening where a lot of those voices have become quiet, or something has changed where they have changed their strategies,
Hmm.
I've had events like that in my own life where it was a spontaneous, like, now things are different, you know,
Hmm.
and I know other people who have too. And though that's beautiful. And those are just great, incredible gifts. And we don't, we can't all expect that in our lives. Maybe it happens. We don't have control over that. But what
Hmm.
we do have control over is like we can do the work to get to the same places. And in my personal experience, even with those kind of spontaneous awakenings, there's still a great deal of work to be done because
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's intense and it's rapid and it's so fast that you have to kind of play catch up to
Hmm.
readjust because it's been like you've just been like uprooted and put over here and you're like whoa, and it
Yeah.
feels great. You're like everything is different. I can act differently. I perceive differently, but the reorientation period can be very challenging, and it can be very challenging for other people in your life, who
Hmm. Hmm.
maybe like in your situation here, you were already like walking down another path since you had your child, since you were pregnant, you were starting to be drawn in another direction in your life, right? And you were there, you were in a more listening place in all this stuff, right? And so he came over here, right? Kind
Hmm.
or closer, maybe not all the way over there, but a lot closer, right? But so like for people who are listening, like if something like this happens to you, like if this is you and your partner somewhere and all of a sudden you go over here and things are great for you, things are really great for you, and you got to reorient and things are kind of shaky and weird, but then your partner is here, right? And
Hmm.
they might not have, they not there. I think it's really rare for someone to also have that spontaneous experience and be in the same place with you. So it can cause, in your case, it's good because you met in the same place. But in other cases, maybe it takes you farther away from your partner,
Hmm.
and like that's its own difficult situation. Like things might be better for you. You might be less depressed, right? You might be able to listen more. You might be more in touch with your heart, but now your partner isn't, and you're far away, and you've got to reconcile that difference somehow, and it can be very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think that is one of the biggest pieces of conversation point that has to be part of this is he did have a spontaneous awakening, and now is where the work is for him.
Yeah,
Now he is being diligent and like so focused, which is not what I'm used to with him,
yeah,
and yeah, it's that spontaneous awakening was probably about I don't know, almost 2 months ago now. And he has not stopped working, like he's not stopped working
yeah,
to to understand and integrate what he experienced.
Yeah.
And maybe one day we'll have him on here to really talk about his
Yeah.
actual experience. I know you got to share, or you got to hear a little bit of it last night, but
Yeah.
well, I don't know what he shared, but he told me he shared something.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that it's like he's doing his own work, but we're also doing a lot of work within our relationship. And so it's it's the spontaneous awakening is maybe not necessarily a better way to go about it.
Right.
It's been very intense,
Yeah.
but also, I mean, like our children are noticing,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're noticing that like something's different. Like we're much more enjoyable around each other. We're much more present with the kids.
Yeah.
We're like arguing less. We're
Hmm.
like much more chill with what's happening in the house. It's just like we're in a much better place.
Wow.
Um, it's it's been so, so, so good, and also so, so hard. But
Yeah.
I also, just to like bring this back around too, is like, I was kind of listening to that podcast this morning that you sent me a couple weeks ago with the Evolving Man,
Yeah.
just to, because I've listened to it before, but I wanted to kind of like listen to some
Yeah.
touch
See if
points in
there's.
case we talked about it.
Mhm.
And it really, I really think there's some really big value in talking about masculine and feminine energies, and being in that space, because in that podcast they touch on a lot of those things. And I just, she Allison Armstrong talks a lot about emasculating men and how that happens so easily, and like why it happens, and the misunderstandings and everything. And you know yeah, we could talk a whole session about that. Okay, like probably 10. But I think that, though, one thing I want to say about that in this conversation is like he wasn't in his masculine in the before times, and
Yeah.
he's really had to learn what the fuck that means, and why I had been talking about that in the before times.
Hmm.
And it was hard for him to hear it, because he didn't want that to be true, that he wasn't in his masculine, or like he wasn't even understanding what that meant. He's like, I'm a dude, of course I'm in my masculine. And it's like,
Right.
well, in the culture,
Yeah.
we have a big misunderstanding about that.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. Yeah. If I don't know if maybe we talked about it before, but that book, yeah, we talked about that a few years ago, the King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover book about
yes,
those four male archetypes. They not only outline those archetypes in their positive form, but there are negative shadow forms of each of those. So you'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm a dude, of course I'm in my masculine energy. Yeah, but you could be in your shadow masculine, and that can
yeah,
anger, rage, depression, anxiety, narcissism, demanding, all this kind of shit. And it's like, yeah, maybe you've got masculine energy, but it is not this transformed, healed, positive, like strong, effective, grounded masculine energy. And it's okay to be in that other way too. Like, this is life, and
yeah,
you're going to end up there. We're all going to end up on the other end of the spectrum at one point or another. And it might be for a long time. And that's
yeah.
okay. We have to be
And
there before we go anywhere else.
absolutely. I really feel like the compassion, what you just talked about was like compassion for all the parts, and that realizing that even the shadow parts have a safety perspective or safety reason for being there. Um, there are no bad parts, as they say,
Right. Okay.
and I think that we talk about the feminine rising, but I also really want to believe, but I do believe through what I've been seeing, is that the masculine, the divine masculine, the healed masculine, whatever, is also rising, which is so
Yeah.
fucking exciting to me. But we've heard about feminine archetypes for a while. Actually, back when I was in massage school, like in 2008, I remember hearing about the book Iron John, because I started asking the questions even back then. Like, I hear about this divine feminine, but what about the divine masculine? And people
Right.
would be like, "Oh, you got to read Iron John." And then I
Yeah.
never read it until like 2 years ago, but
Yeah.
or like a year ago or something. But it's like it's here too. And so, oh, this is what I was going to say is the feminine archetype Kali. it's kind of more known now that Kali is like the destruction, right? And that she's the goddess with all the heads and the tongue sticking out, and like she's dark, you know.
Right.
And we know that, like, maybe we don't know, but a lot of people know that Kali represents destruction, but through that then beauty comes.
Right.
And that I feel like with all those male archetypes too, or masculine archetypes, is that it's like there's the shadow side, but there's like a purpose for the shadow.
Yes.
If
Yes.
we can like give compassion to the purpose of the shadow, that's when transformation can occur. But we can't transform if we're just saying that's bad.
Yes. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Like it's imperative to recognize the value of the shadow aspects of ourselves and to be able to honor and respect and love them. That is how integration happens. It doesn't happen by trying to scoop a fucking cut apart away from yourself, right? It's
Mhm.
like cutting off your own hand, your own arm, right? Like that doesn't make it better. It's integrating and understanding, right? It's a part of yourself. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's critical, really critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back to that point about like the healed masculine or somehow the light side of the masculine, I would argue that the on average around the world, we've been in the shadow masculine for the last 2000 years or more, you know. And yes, there has been periods of time and in different places where there was lightness, there was the positive expression of the masculine energy in different civilizations and cultures and societies, or even just individual families, right? But overall, I would say the aggregate of it has been the shadow side of things. You know, I mean, look at rape culture still exists, right? And that's not just a United States problem, that's everywhere, right?
Right.
And then we've got the war, right? We've got the continuous ongoing wars everywhere for, there's always some people fighting somebody else somewhere, right? So there's a lot of those aspects that are showing up, and those are the shadow parts. So um, I believe we are definitely coming out of it. But it's hard and it requires work and, it's not something that just happens. It's something that we as humans are actively participating in and it needs to happen it the happening is a conscious thing. It's not just like an accident, right?
Mhm.
Accident is unconscious, right? We didn't intend for something to happen. That's the shadow side. It's literally, if we go to the most base metaphor, it's dark. We cannot see. You're unconscious. You do not know, right? It's unavailable, right? So the work is a conscious act to become the light form of the masculine or feminine is something that requires your conscious intention and your work and effort. And
Mhm.
it's worth it because you know, not only are we affecting others negatively, but we ourselves are affected in a negative manner when we stay there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, One other thing, I wanted to give credit to your partner, because you said he's just been kind of since the awakening, he's just been kind of nonstop doing the work. And I really think that deserves recognition, and honoring of him because there's something that can happen where an individual can have an awakening and then just kind of ride those good vibes and not do the work and then just kind
Mhm.
of slowly fall back down to where they were.
Mhm.
Right. That's something that's very real. I've witnessed it, and you don't have to do the work. You can just,
Mhm.
there's so much positive energy that comes up in your system and in your mind and consciousness that it can be so overwhelming that you are just residing in that space without recognizing that things need to be integrated and you need to start to take actions. Um,
Mhm.
so that's where yes, so he's doing that, and that's like amazing because if you don't, you can slide back to where you were. Like that happened. That's a risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one thing that he has talked a lot about, and we have talked a lot about, is the fear of the gift going away, or like, just slowly going back into the mundane. But
Yeah.
one thing that he's anchored into for himself, and for me as his partner, being support and watching and cheering him on, right, is that he has said that he would have to, like, his gift was so profound for him that he would have to actively push it away
Yeah.
for it to go away,
Yeah.
because what he witnessed and visioned and saw was like so transformative in that moment. Now,
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, obviously I'm in that situation, but if I pull myself out of the situation, I feel like he got really lucky,
Yeah.
because I feel like it's not always that
Strong.
big. Yeah. So I feel, but I feel like because it was that big, maybe that's what he needed or whatever, who knows. But that is what allows him to anchor into
Yeah. Yeah.
the work being done. But I also think, which by the way, I have full consent to talk about all this with him. Like, he's given me consent to talk about this. Um, I still like can't talk about it from his perspective because like it's such a beautiful thing. Like, he has to be the one to really talk about it.
Yes.
I
Yes.
can only really talk about it from what I experienced, or am experiencing. But I think that that is part of this, right? Is that, like, I was open-hearted enough to believe in his transformation, and then now to support him in
Yeah.
this journey. It's not just his work to do, it's mine and it's ours.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's going to make this sustainable. And I also think, he's been really called to share his story, and we're trying to figure out what that looks like. We have a couple of ideas brewing, but I think that that's another layer to it, is like, okay, maybe you didn't get this big, huge, strong transformation, but you got something smaller. Well, now there's going to be more people like he and I, and I'm sure you and everyone else, who can like support
Yeah.
like encourage you on that journey, to keep doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. 100%. Like, we can't do any of the work alone, right? I
Right.
mean, there are things you can do on your own. Like, you are the only one that's going to be with yourself 24/7, right? And so it's really you that has to do the deepest loving, right? But all of us need support, encouragement. We need leaders and helpers with tools and prior experience who have already walked this road that can help us integrate, that can help us use the tools with ourselves, right? And
Hmm.
it's you cannot do it alone. Humans
Hmm.
aren't built for that.
Yeah.
It would be like birds evolved to have wings, right? They're supposed to fly. If you had a bird and like, okay, most birds, but there's birds
Don't
that
forget
walk.
about the penguins.
Yeah, don't forget about the penguins, right? Like, we humans are evolved to be social creatures that work with each other. That's how we survive. That was the survival strategy for our organism, right? The survival strategy for birds was flight. That was the strategy for that organism, right? And if they stop using that strategy, those birds are not going to survive, right?
Right.
So if humans stop using the strategy of the interrelatedness, interdependentness to connect, um, share the burdens and share the victories, you were not going to make it. Individuals in your individual life, you're not going to make it. And as a collective, we're not going to make it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want to pause this and start another?
I actually I would love to, and I have a commitment at 11. So
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah.
Well,
But let's schedule for, we'll end and we'll schedule for next week if you're available.
okay.
Yeah.
Let's just take a second to have any parting thoughts in all of this, like maybe one or two sentences. What you got?
Yeah, absolutely. Parting sentences. Be compassionate with yourself and ask for help. Yeah.
Yeah.
For obviously you and your partner in the situation, but I'm speaking to anyone who's listening, you know, be gentle and compassionate with yourself and ask for help. And you don't have to be asking a professional or someone right away. You can just be asking a friend or someone you trust, that you trust and love and feel safe with. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I think my parting words would be like, ask for help, yes, and get to know those feelings of trust so that you know what trust feels like. And that's a big order, and be gentle with yourself during that process.
Yep, 100% agree for sure. And um, one other thought that comes to mind, we're talking about your partner's spontaneous awakening, which was a big event for him. Um, I know from experience and from talking to other people that there can be an envy or a jealousy or a longing, if you are in a place of shadow or darkness or difficulty or stuckness, and hearing about spontaneous awakening, spontaneous opening, and like a yearning and a wanting. And I also want to say, like, have compassion for yourself, and that um, you don't need to have that. And like, there's nothing wrong with you for not having that. It doesn't mean anything about God or the universe. And that sometimes actually just doing the work, taking the steps one foot in front of the other is more valuable and easier than a spontaneous awakening. You might be
Yes,
sitting there listening to this, praying for your own spontaneous awakening, and it might happen, and you might be like, "Oh fuck, what did I, careful what you wish for," right?
absolutely.
It's not easy, it's not comfortable. It's kind of like, getting in a Concorde jet and flying to the other side of the planet, and then you have like 2 days of trying to adjust to time. Like, there's a
Hmm.
big adjustment period. It's not easy or comfortable when you go through
Hmm.
something like that. But what it is easy and comfortable is just doing one step at a time, here and there
Yes,
and there. It's easy, smooth, and comfortable. And so don't belittle the other path of consciously doing the work. It's very important.
absolutely. I 110% agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Sarah. This was a wonderful talk. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Bye.